Good morning. My name is Ralf Friedrichs. I'm an author, an addiction recovery coach, a life coach, and the host of this show, the Take Your Life Back Today radio show. You can also see us on YouTube. If you go to YouTube, go to channel Take Your Life Back Today show. The power of addiction and the addiction to power, my friends. As an addiction recovery coach, I work throughout the U.S., Canada, and I've worked with some very, very addicted people throughout the world as well. People who use heroin, they inject cocaine, they drink alcohol, crystal meth, and every drug known to man. And these people suffer. The success of an addiction recovery coach is to be measured by how long his clients lived, and I am a failure because my clients, some of them have died very young because they didn't want to be coached. They didn't want help, relatively speaking. They die of HIV, they die of hepatitis C, they die of infections of their heart valves, they die of infections of the brains, of their spines, of their hearts, of their bloodstream. They die of suicide, of overdose, of violence, of accidental deaths. And if you look at them, you call to mind the words of a great Egyptian novelist in Negib Mavu, who wrote, "Nothing records the effects of a sad life as graphically as the human body." Because these people lose everything. They lose their health, they lose their beauty, they lose their teeth, they lose their wealth, they lose human relationship, and in the end, they often lose their lives. And yet, nothing shakes them from their addiction. Nothing can force them to give up their addiction. The addictions are powerful, and the question is, why are they so powerful? As one of my patients said to me, "I am not afraid of dying," he said. "I'm more afraid of living." A question we have to ask is, why are people afraid of life? And if you want to understand addiction, you can't look at what's wrong with the addiction. You have to look at what is right about it. Friends, in other words, what is the person getting from addiction? What are they getting that otherwise they don't have? What addicts get is release from pain. What they get is a sense of peace, a sense of control, a sense of calmness, very, very temporarily. Folks, and the question that I want to ask is, why are these qualities missing from their lives? What happened to them? Now, if you look at drugs like heroin, morphine, like codeine, if you look at cocaine, if you look at alcohol, these are all painkillers. In one way or another, they all soothe pain. And thus, the real question in addiction is, why the addiction but why the pain? My definition of addiction is any behavior that gives you temporary relief, temporary pleasure, but in the long term causes harm, has some negative consequences, and you can't give it up despite those negative consequences, my friends. And from that perspective, you can understand that there are many, many addictions. Yes, there is the addiction to drugs, but there is also the addiction to consumerism. There is the addiction to sex, to the internet, to shopping, to food. The Buddhists have this idea of hungry ghosts. The hungry ghosts are these creatures with large empty bellies and small scrawny necks and tiny little mouths, so they can never get enough. They can never fill their emptiness on the inside. And we all hungry ghosts in society. We all have the emptiness, and so many of us are trying to fill that emptiness from the outside, and addiction is all about trying to fill that emptiness from the outside, my friends. Now, if you want to ask the question of why people are in pain, you can't look at their genetics. You have to look at their lives. And in the case of my clients, my highly addicted clients, it's very clear why they are in pain. Because they have been abused all of their lives. They began life as abused children. All of the women I have worked with over 6, 7 years, hundreds of them, they have all been sexually abused as children. And the men have been traumatized as well. The men had been sexually abused, neglected, physically abused, abandoned, and emotionally over and over again. And that's why the pain. And there's something else here too. The human brain itself develops an interaction with the environment. It's not genetically programmed to. The kind of environment that a child has will actually shape the development of the brain. Now, I can tell you about 2 experiences with mice that I know about. You take a little mouse and you put food in its mouth, and he'll eat and enjoy it and swallow it. But if you put the food down a few inches away from this nose, from the mouse's nose, he will not move to eat it. He will actually starve to death rather than eat that. Why, you might ask? Because genetically, they knocked out the receptors for the chemical in the brain called dopamine. Dopamine is an incentive and a motivation chemical. Dopamine flows whenever we are motivated, excited, vital, vibrant, curious about something, whether seeking food or sexual partner. Without the dopamine, we have no motivation. Now, what you do think the addict gets when he has that? When the addict shoots cocaine, when the addict shoots crystal meth, or almost any other drug, they get a hit of dopamine in their brain, and the question is, what happened to their brains in the first place? Because it is a myth that drugs are addictive. Drugs are not by themselves addictive, but because most people who try most drugs never become addicted to it. So the question is, why are some people vulnerable to getting addicted? Just like food is not addictive, but some people, for some people it is. Shopping is not addictive, but for some people it is. Television is not addictive, but for some people it is. So the question is, why? The accessibility. There's another little experiment with mice that I know about, where an infant mice, if they are separated from their mothers, will not cry for their mothers. Now, what would that mean in the wild? It means that they would die. Because only the mothers protect the child's life and nurtures the child. And why? Because genetically, they knocked out the receptors, the chemical binding sites in the brain for the endorphins, and endorphins are indigenous morphine-like substances. Endorphins are our own natural pain killers. Now, what endorphins also do, they make possible the experience of love, they make possible the experience of attachment to a parent, and the parent's attachment to the child. So these little mice without endorphin receptors in their brains will naturally not call for their mothers. In other words, the addiction to these drugs, and of course the heroin and the morphine, what they do is they act on the endorphin system, and that's why they work. And so the question is, what happens to people that they need these chemicals from the outside? Well, what happens to them is, when they are abused as children, those circuits don't develop. Friends, when you don't have love and connection in your life, when you are very, very young, and those important brain circuits just don't develop properly, and under those conditions of abuse, that's when things don't develop properly, and their brains then are susceptible when they do drugs. Now they feel normal, now they feel pain relief, now they feel love. And as one client said to me, when I first did heroin, she said, it felt like a warm, soft hug, just like a mother hugging her baby. That's a shame when you hear that. And what does that really mean? It means that I am working all the time, and when I am not working, I'm consumed by buying music. What message do my kids get? My kids get the same message, that they are not wanted. And this is how we pass it on. We pass on the trauma, and we pass on the suffering. Unconsciously, we pass it on from one generation to the next. So obviously, there are many, many ways to fill this emptiness, and for each person, there is a different way of filling the emptiness. But with emptiness, always goes back to what we didn't get when we were very, very small and young. And then we look at the drug addict and we say to the drug addict, how can you possibly do this to yourself? How can you possibly inject this terrible substance into your body that may kill you in the long run? But look at what we are doing to the earth. We are injecting all kinds of things into the atmosphere and the oceans and the environment that is killing all of us, that is killing the earth. Now, which addiction is greater? The addiction to oil or the consumeration, which causes the greater harm? And yet we judge the drug addict because we actually see they are just like us, and we don't like that. So we say, you are different from us, you are worse than us. You should be ashamed of yourself. And I can tell you that coming from personal experience with alcohol, the same thing has happened to me. But the question I asked you right now this morning, to wrap this up, if you can understand the suffering of these native people and how that suffering makes them seek relief from pain in their addictions, what about the people who are perpetrating them? What are the addicted to do? Well, they are addicted to power, they are addicted to wealth, they are addicted to acquisition. They want to make themselves bigger than they really are. And when I was trying to understand the addiction to power, I looked at some of the most powerful people in the history. I looked at Alexander the Great, I looked at Napoleon, I looked at Hitler, I looked at Genghis Khan, I looked at Stalin. It's very interesting when you look at these people, I might say. First of all, why did they need power so much? Interestingly enough, physically, they were all very small people, my size or smaller, about 5'10" or so. Actually, maybe smaller than that. They came from outsiders. They were not part of a major population. Stalin was a Georgian, not a Russian. Napoleon was a Corsican, not a Frenchman. Alexander was a Macedonian, not a Greek, and Hitler was an Austrian, not a German. So a real sense of insecurity and inferiority. And they needed power to feel okay in themselves, to make themselves feel bigger, and in order to get that power, they were quite willing to fight wars and to kill a lot of people just to maintain that power. I'm not saying that only small people can be power hungry, but it is interesting to look at these examples, isn't it? I mean, you heard what I just had to say, because power, the addiction to power, is always about the emptiness that we try to feel from outside. And Napoleon, even in exile on the island of St. Helena, after he lost his power, he said, I love power, I love power. He couldn't think of himself without power. He had no sense of himself without being powerful externally. And that's very interesting when you compare it to the people like the Buddha or Jesus. Folks, because if you look back at the story about Jesus and Buddha, both of them were tempted by the devil, and one of the things that the devil offers them is power, earthly power, and they both said no. Now, why did they say no? Is because they were loved when they were younger. I'm going to wrap this up right now, but I will tell you this. We, as parents and grandparents, set the example that starts at home for our children and grandchildren. Role model. Let's teach our children to be soft on the inside, but yet to be prepared for the world. May God bless each and every one. Call me at 844-405-HELP. Together, we can help each other take our lives back. And together, we need to love our children and our grandchildren. Have a great day. We will talk to each and every one of you tomorrow, and take good care. Bye-bye now. Take care.